All right, welcome to another episode of the Business of Coaching Workshop. I'm excited today to be live with Dr. Michael Mash. Dr. Mash is a doctor of physical therapy, certified strength and conditioning specialist, and the founder, CEO of Barbell Rehab, continuing education company that bridges the gap between strength training and rehabilitation. From his beginnings as a high school baseball player to becoming a leading expert in integrating barbell with training rehab, Dr. Mash has made it his life's mission to help people overcome pain and stay lifting. Early in his career, he worked with older adults, teaching countless seniors how to squat, deadlift, and press to improve their strength and longevity. And then, frustrated with the traditional medical model that often tells people to stop lifting or resorts to unnecessary surgeries for minor aches, he created Barbell Rehab in 2019 to offer a better approach. Since then, his team has taught over 140 live courses by my count, maybe it's more by now, worldwide, including at Kabuki Strength, Under Armour HQ, and On It Gym, educating more than 2,800 coaches and clinicians on keeping clients training safely through pain. Dr. Mash's philosophy emphasizes maintaining movement and making smart modifications, not complete rest, so clients can continue training around pain and building resilience. And he is often heard saying that strength training is rehab, that everyone from athletes to post-operative patients and seniors can benefit from strength training when it's applied correctly. I'm excited to dive into this journey of building Barbell Rehab and learn insights from blending business with clinical practice to help lifters stay strong and pain-free. And I've been following you for a long time, so welcome to the show, and excited to hear more about your story.
Thanks for inviting me on, Andrew. I'm excited to see where the show goes. That was a great intro, pretty much covers all aspects of things. But yeah, let's see what we get into.
So, going back to the beginning, sort of the origin story, you started as a DPT and worked mostly with older adults early on.
Yeah, so I got my DPT in 2016. Started treating immediately full-time at a hospital outpatient facility. So it was like a building right next to the hospital. So I was routinely seeing a lot of post-operative, like knee replacements, hip replacements, shoulder surgeries, and deconditioned older adults. And basically at the time, I've always had this vision for barbell rehab, and at the time I was like, does this really kind of match up with my career goal here? And at the time I didn't think so, but now that I look back and I realize, oh my gosh, you've helped so many older adults like learn how to find entry points into strength training, and it absolutely did have an effect. And it was a positive on my career just to be able to get older folks squatting, hinging, right? Maybe it's as simple as pressing overhead with a 5-pound dumbbell, right? We start somewhere and we build from there.
What, from your personal experiences growing up and your early career, inspired you to found Barbell Rehab?
Yeah, so I was a high school baseball pitcher so that was way back in 2007. And I remember I was still as tall as I was now, so about 6 feet, but I was about 80 pounds lighter. So I was super tall and super lanky, 130 pounds, 6 foot. And I wanted to throw harder. That was the initial goal. I was a freshman and I wanted to learn how to throw harder. And I was fortunate enough to have like a very strength forward athletic trainer at our school. And I'll never forget that day where I told him, I was like, I want to throw harder. And he said, okay, let's go in the weight room. And he had me set up a barbell in a rack just below knee height. And he said, this is a rack pull. And we're going to put a 45-pound plate on each side. And I want you to just stand up with it. And I said, this is going to help me throw harder? And he said, absolutely. Right?
He didn't hand you a heavier ball to throw?
No, I know. Right? So that's where I started learning like the power of just general strength, because what did we do? We did squat, hinge, press, pull, all to throw harder. And that sort of lined up with being a testosterone infused 14, 15-year-old. And next thing you know, I put 40 pounds on in a couple years and was throwing harder. And the rest was history. So I was incorporating strength very early on. And then I eventually ended up with a shoulder injury, not from strength training, but just from the nature of the kid throwing curveballs when I was 12. So I ended up with a slap tear. and a shoulder surgery in 2011. And that's when I really started to see the rehab side of things. So I've already had about 3-4 years of lifting under my belt, and now I get to see the rehab side of things. And I got to see both good and not so good rehab. And that's where I really had the idea. I was like, wow, like rehab should be more like a strength training program than a rehab program, right? You have two totally different therapists. One's giving me a band and one's telling me to lift weights. So that's where I really got into it and really got inspired to go to PT school. So this has been a long time coming. I've had the dream of running something like this ever since I've been in high school. And now here
What
we
was
are.
it like going through the PT program? Now, so you were going through sort of in 2010 to 2015 kind of time frame?
Yeah, like
That
yeah. So I graduated 16, so I was right in that 2010 to 2015 era.
it
I'm
seems like there was a lot of change happening in the
exactly.
physical therapy universe during that era. I remember getting into lifting kind of late 2000s. PTs were sort of the enemy of strength
Yeah,
and conditioning coaches because often they would say, don't move or put them onto some sort of silly long rehab program. But it now I'm seeing more and more. You were kind of at the bleeding edge, I would say, it seemed to me early in that kind of new voice of physical therapy that now seems more common.
yep.
What was it like? You know, you're coming into it with that perspective on the benefit of strength training and that vision. Was that at odds with what you were learning through the program at the time, or was it kind of evolving as you were
For
in that
sure,
time?
it was at odds, and it was cool because I basically got in before the Insta physio craze. I mean, I have the handle Barbell Rehab, right?
Yeah.
It was available in 2016 when I started the page, and I started this in PT school when I was in my 5th clinical rotation, and I was just like, I want something more. I want a platform to be able to share my knowledge about blending and including strength in physical therapy, and we didn't get much of it in PT school. I remember asking one of our professors, like, when are we going to learn like the exercise aspect? Because we're memorizing all the different like ultrasound protocols, how to use all the different gadgets and modalities, and memorizing post-op protocols. I said, when are we going to learn about strength training and how to do these exercises? And I remember being told, oh, you'll get that in your clinical rotations. So I was like, it's going to be the luck of the draw of where I get sent, right? Kind of deal. So that's what kind of really inspired me to keep lifting, get my CSCS in PT school, and that's when I really started the brand Barbell Rehab. And I tried to be as loud of a voice as I could back then, just screaming from the rooftop, like, right, controversial. And yeah, I look back now and I see, wow, it's been almost 10 years, and I
Yeah.
think it's a lot more mainstream
Yeah.
for a lot of fitness forward physios in the space than it was a decade ago.
Yeah, it seems that there have been a couple of big paradigm shifts that have come out since biosocial psychological model
Hmm.
gained steam, even though that's an old model. I think it goes back to the 70s. It seems to have picked up a lot more steam. And
It
then
does, yeah.
I'm hearing more and more PTs saying things like movement is medicine, motion is lotion.
Hmm.
Building their business model. We had earlier this year a PT out of Tennessee who found his business model as a strength coach was actually more profitable and effective than his PT mill job that so he
Yep.
kind of left and transitioned that. I'm curious though, 10 years ago you were still like I would say bleeding edge. Where did you get the confidence to build that philosophy? I mean, was it purely from your personal experience, as a high school baseball player, or did you piece together some kind of first principles? How did
Yeah.
you come across the idea at a time when it was contrarian but correct that strength training itself is a form of rehab?
Yeah. So I was fortunate enough to have that athletic trainer in high school already thinking that way. So
Mm,
my first exposure as a 15-year-old kid was that do these exercises,
it's amazing.
right? So, and even when my shoulder started bugging me, he was still helping me and telling me, yeah, okay, well, we just need to modify it. Instead of benching right now, we're going to switch to dumbbell benching, right? Anything that we could do to kind of find that tolerable entry point. So it was a combination of my early experience and then getting in tons and tons of reps with older adults, as
Hmm.
well as I was a research nerd at the time too. So I was just pouring into the research, anything that I could get my hands on to have something that could back up my arguments, which at the time I felt and like knew to be true, but I was like, I just can't be out here just saying these things, right? Well, you could get away with a lot more 10 years ago. Now it's a different story, but you could pretty much say anything back then. But yeah, so I was digging into the research. I even remember for my fifth clinical rotation, did I cut out? Am I still here?
Dan, are you still got video for Dr. Mash? I could still hear you, but
Okay.
your video dropped out.
I'll just keep rolling then.
Yeah.
Um, is that good?
Yeah, let's keep going, and I think Dan is still on. He can hopefully take a look at whether video needs to get going again.
Where was I? I was talking about
How,
going
developing your
back.
philosophy, building confidence. There you are, and you're back. Doing research, becoming a research
Yeah.
nerd,
The research,
building
yeah.
your
I
case.
remember it was like my last year PT school where I was like, we had to do some sort of like massive research project. And mine was titled The Role of Low Bar Squats for ACL tears and ACL repairs. And I just remember giving this lecture and all of the other older PTs at the time just looking at me like I was crazy. But hey, strength is rehab when it really comes down to it.
Mm. So you've advocated introducing load day one of rehab when appropriate, like
Hmm.
when assessing a squat or a press. Obviously, at Barbell Logic, where we're our kind of origin story, we're big fans of that. But when do you feel it's important not to delay uh, strength work, and how do you modify lifts for somebody who has pain so they can keep training?
Gotcha. So basically, our only hard cutoff for like, hey, you probably aren't qualified, or qualified is not the right word. You probably shouldn't strength train right now would be like presence of red flag signs and symptoms. Like if somebody is having severe body wide issues, like somebody shows up and they're really sick, or we need to refer them out because we think they need immediate imaging or we suspect any kind of like sinister pathology. But I mean, that's 1% or less of cases. And once you rule that out, I load on day one. And my goal has always been like, how do we find a way to meet this person where they're at and comfortably get them strength training? Okay. And like when I first started, I was way more rigid about it, where we had like very specific templates of ways to do things. Like this is how you squat, moderate stance, light toe out, right? And we had these check boxes. And once I started realizing that's good and all for people that don't have pain, but if you do have pain, sometimes these
Hmm.
cookie cutter ways of teaching people how to lift just don't work. So I
Hmm.
always say, in the presence of pain, we need movement options. And it comes down to a good coach can help guide people to what movement option is best for them. So a prime example would be, let's say somebody's having knee pain and you show them how to squat. You start them in a moderate stance, slight toe out, which works for the majority of people. And they say, hey, that bothers my knee. Well, the old way would just be like, okay, we're not going to squat today. Our way is like, well, let's see if we can tinker around with this squat form to make it more comfortable. Why don't you try widening your stance and toeing out more? Suddenly people are like, oh, I feel that working the inside of my thighs more than the front of my kneecap. My knees
Hmm.
doesn't bother me. My knee doesn't bother me anymore. So it's just like working back and forth, the coach and the client, to help guide them to something that's tolerable. And that's where we start from. So that's what it really comes down to. Like we know a squat should look a certain way within, and we want to give like a bandwidth of acceptable forms, and the odds of one of those working out for somebody are going to be good.
How do you coach coaches? Because your program is
Hmm.
primarily geared towards coaches, although I'm guessing it's a mix of just lifters, but mostly coaches. How do you coach a coach to assess the red flags and symptoms if when they're not a PT, or
Hmm.
they're not qualified or capable of diagnosing
Yep.
particular pathologies? You know, and I mean, I can remember when I first started coaching, if somebody tweaked their back, I went into panic mode. I immediately
Sure.
was trying to call a PT. 10, 15 years later, it takes a lot more to get me kind of spooked.
Yeah, for
But
sure.
how do
Yeah.
you coach people to get familiar with that, or to be able to differentiate between red flag and green flag?
Yeah, that's the first thing is if something seems off, trust your gut,
Mm,
right? It's not a coach's job to rule out red flags, but the fact of the matter is you might be the first person that this person is reporting their symptoms to. So I always just go with like a couple ones to keep in the front of your mind, especially with like low back pain. So the big three we're looking at for low back pain is if both legs completely go numb, or you're losing motor control of the legs, that's a hard stop. Let's refer out. If they start having bowel or bladder dysfunction, right? Inability to go to the bathroom, or they're losing control of their bowels and bladder, that's probably not a day you want to make a modification. That's probably a day that we should refer out here. And unrelenting night pain, these things that are really going to just they're going to
mm,
naturally raise an eyebrow in you, and if that's the case, then we should refer out.
mm.
And the big thing is, if they have been cleared by their PCP or their physician to start an exercise program, you're going to be good to go. But
Right,
we're talking about like, hey, somebody just tweaked something over the weekend and now they're
right,
coming in. What do I do? Yeah. So
right.
we're looking at neurological involvement, numbness, tingling, or other systemic issues. Pain alone without these systemic issues is usually a good sign. Let's try and modify.
How much emphasis do you place on client education and mindset, and weaving that into a coach's practice?
Big. And it might not be at first, though, right?
Mm.
Because you have to. I used to try and just educate people. In my world, we used to just call it like you're going to pain science somebody and spend the whole first session just teaching them about pain. That never goes well, right?
Yeah,
Because you have to build rapport first. So I always say, like, we need to figure out what this person's goals are, right? They're not here to lift. They're here to lift because they want something deeper. What is that deeper thing? Do they want more energy to play with their kids? Do they want to feel stronger? Do they want to improve confidence? So once we can kind of find those things out, that can help us tailor the exercise program, right? We're still going to have big basic compound lifts for pretty much every functioning human being when it comes down to it. But mindset really, really matters. And that's something that we can weave in as we go along the sessions versus just piling it all up front. That was an early mistake that I made.
mm. Reminds me of when I would coach early on. The first session would be, I would take it as my opportunity to try to share everything I knew about biomechanics.
Yeah.
And they're like, "What are you talking about? I thought I was going to lift some weights here today."
Yeah.
It's like, you can save that for later on. It's not that it's bad information. It's just, yeah, timing is everything there.
Yeah, I mean it's newer coaches, newer physios. There's inevitably going to be some imposter syndrome. So you want to like try and let this person know, hey, I'm a safe person. I know what I'm doing. So we tend to over coach, over cue, over educate in the beginning. But then as we realize that that doesn't work as well, and you start to settle in and trust yourself a little bit more, then you realize that those are things you can layer in as you go.
As the strength rehab movement has picked up steam, are you still finding that there are a lot of myths out there, like butt wink causes injury, or don't let the knees go over toes? In fact, it seems like now we have entire industries saying the opposite of what used to be myths, like
Yeah,
knees over toes guy now is the thing.
yeah.
Or so do you find that with the increase of social media and more information that you're batting down more myths, or do you find that the audience, coach and client alike, are more educated and you're kind of
Yeah.
shaping the perspective more?
It depends what their background is and who they follow on social media,
Yeah.
right? I like to think of Barbell Rehab is, and this is something we teach in every course. When there's people like shouting from the rooftops, polar opposites, the answer is usually somewhere in the middle. And
Mm,
you're right, we have this situation now where there's folks in one camp that are like, we have to perfectly optimize this bodyweight squat before we dare add any load, or you have to go through all of these different dynamic warm-ups before somebody is safe to lift. And that's obviously a little bit too far-fetched. But then we go to the other side where we got people saying form doesn't matter. You can lift however you want, and the body will adapt to it. So I like to look at these and say, okay, what is the good that each of these camps are like? What is the good here? And the truth is often somewhere in the middle. And that's where we teach. That's our entire brand. Maybe it's just because I'm a non-confrontational type of guy, but the truth for me usually lies in the middle. So what we teach is like, hey, like, what are situations where somebody might need a more extensive warm up versus situations where somebody's probably fine just to walk in the gym and start bodyweight squatting? What are situations where form's going to matter more? Hint, if you're working with a high level power lifter, every inch you can reduce the range of motion, every inch you can reduce the horizontal moment arm is going to matter. And if you're working with that clientele, you need to be well versed in that. But if you're just working with the 80-year-old deconditioned client in the gym and the goal is to build work capacity, I'm happy if they're just moving and they feel good, right? So form's going to matter a little bit less there. So that's why that was a lot of my motivation between starting like a 2-day course and making longer online courses, because we can really cover the nuance there and hit that gray area of all of these different topics. Is it okay to round your back when you deadlift? Can you let the knees go forward when you squat? And if the answer is always going to be 9 times out of 10, it depends. So we like to teach that it depends.
This is a great segue into the more business side of your universe. You hit on a couple of things there that I wanted to ask you about. One is that I first heard of you, and when we met earlier this year, I think I mentioned that I remember in 2020, 2021, Barbell Rehab was blowing up by Facebook, Instagram. Like it seemed like you'd been around forever. I couldn't believe you just started in 2019 because I could have sworn I'd seen Barbell Rehab stuff for like 5 or 10 years at that point. But in a world in which the extremes are the attention grabbers, how do you think about your marketing and your social media when your perspective is usually, like you said, the middle of the road? And
Yeah,
it
that's the
seems like
tough
you
part.
get pulled towards the polar opposites to be able to stand out.
Yeah, and that's an ethical thing. The reason why you probably have thought I've been around for a while is I started monetizing the brand in 2019, but I started the Instagram page in 2016. So for
Okay,
3 years there,
that makes sense.
almost 4 years, it was just posting. I didn't know what I was doing other than I'm working full time at this physio job and I come home and make Instagram posts. It wasn't until 19 that I decided to monetize.
Okay.
In the beginning, I was much more controversial, and I'll admit that because it worked to grow a brand in the early, like in the mid 2010s. You could just be super controversial. And I've kind of stepped back from that because it's an ethical thing, right? It comes down to marketing. Like, are the hooks I'm using for my Instagram videos, are they catchy enough, but are they still ethical? That's the way I like to look at it. If I write something that makes me feel icky, well, then it's too much, right? So it has to be, you can't be at one end of the spectrum or the other. You can't just be somebody who is just all clickbait and then you don't deliver on the back end. But you also can't, you have to realize social media is a game that you got to play, right? So that's what we do. I mean, we advertise social media the hell out of our courses, right? The Barbell Rehab Method certification, come get certified, because I want people to be excited about it, because I know the product that I'm going to offer on the back end is evidence-based and is going to change the way they coach and help more people. So as long as you know that the product or the service that you're selling is helping people, then it's your duty to market it. And that was like a big shift for me, right? And a lot of coaches, I think, feel like marketing's icky or I shouldn't sell. But you need to really are you changing people's lives for the better? If the answer is yes, then it's your duty to sell it. And that's how I look at it.
That's awesome. I don't think we've had somebody put it quite that way. We've heard, I've been hearing it more and more often that sales is a service, sales is coaching, sales as helping, selling is helping, but selling is your duty. That's kind of taking it to the next level. Like if you truly believe in what you're doing, then it's almost like a moral obligation to put it out there and help as many people as possible. On the business side, well, actually, follow-up question first. Now that you're one of many voices. One of the other problems we hear from coaches is feeling like they don't have anything new to put out. Not to say that your perspective
Mhm.
is not different, but there's more people out there putting that type of content out. Do you wrestle with feeling like you have to put something in new, or do you think of it more as there's somebody out there who hasn't heard this yet and I'm trying to find that person?
Yeah, that was something I struggled with when I first started the brand. And I think anytime you take the leap into entrepreneurship, there's always going to be that little monster in the back of your brain of like, how long am I going to be able to keep this thing going, right? Because it's a big shift to go from 8 to 4:30, show up and get a paycheck, to be like, I'm the guy. I have to keep coming up with things. And that was a big thing I had to get over early, was like, I'm going to run out of customers. I got to run out of customers. And now I realize, like, you got to have that abundance mindset. There are a ton of personal trainers, at least from what I do. There's a ton of personal trainers and a ton of physical therapists graduating every single year, right? So everything I say is, I wouldn't call it recycled, but I'm basically just saying my main things about staying moving while in the presence of pain safely, and just finding different ways to kind of say it on Instagram. Uh, so that's my kind of audience, is personal trainers and physical therapists. If you are a personal trainer or a physical therapist and your audience is the general training population, there's just so many folks out there, right?
Yeah.
You think about it, like if you can just get 15, 20 people recurring, right?
Mm-hmm.
You mean to tell me you can't find 15 to 20 people out of 7 billion people in the world? So I always say, like, think abundantly. Yes, if you put a message out there that resonates with somebody, they're going to end up hiring you, as long as you can close the sale effectively.
We got a live question from Patricia Rose. Does your cert and rehab also have postpartum issues, hips, knees, low back, bladder issues?
Gotcha. So not the live course, but we have a specific online course that covers all of that. It's called Unique Considerations for the Female Barbell Athlete. It covers exactly that. It's 9 hours long, and it was created by one of my instructors, Dr. Sophia Veras, who's a world champion powerlifter and DPT, and who's gone through this. So we cover all of that, like how to modify through pregnancy, postpartum, menopause. But yeah, that was the reason why we did that. Is I actually taught a live course one day, and somebody asked me about the Valsalva maneuver. And they said, well, that's good and all, but what about for women who are peeing themselves when they lift? And I said, that is a great question. I have no clue, but let me find out. And that's when we kind of went down that path of, now we're going to make online courses that kind of complement and supplement the live course.
Awesome. Was there a fork in the road for you where you decided, I'm going to do the education business model
Mm-hmm.
over the clinical or the coaching
Yeah.
business model?
Good question. Yeah. So there was a time there where I was working part-time at my hospital outpatient job so that I could run Barbell Rehab as a clinic out of a gym. I loved it. It was like I was treating Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at the clinic, and then Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday morning, I was at the gym, where I had like a little office in the corner of the gym. And when I started realizing it when I was doing 1 hour sessions with people, and I was like, man, one of the things that I enjoy the most is the education piece of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, how can I help even more people? And then it just kind of naturally came to me. I was always the guy leading study sessions in undergrad, the guy leading study sessions at PT school. And I always knew that I had a knack for taking complex subjects and kind of breaking it down and packaging it so that people could understand better and apply. And that's when I taught my first one-day seminar in September 2019. And as soon as I did that, I was like, oh man, I'm onto something here.
Mm-hmm.
And then I gradually kept teaching more and more. And by the beginning of 2020, I did 10 one-day courses. And I was like, I think this is the way I want to go. So I basically closed up on-site clinic, transitioned to Barbell Rehab as an education company. And at that time, I was also doing online coaching with about 10 to 15 clients. And then the con ed side got so busy that I eventually stopped doing the online training. And now here we are, running 2 live courses, 6 online courses, and with 7 other instructors as a full-fledged con ed company. But
Amazing.
initially, it was all based on my love for education.
I recently heard it's not a new idea, but was rereading the concept of managing your energy, not your time. It sounds
Mm,
like you kind of followed your energy, where it was pulling you, where you found yourself the
100%.
most interested.
100%.
What, you know, that kind of growth is really impressive, and I'm curious what you found to be the most effective way to grow your community and your customer base.
Gotcha. I think it was a combination of consistency and learning how to run Facebook and Instagram ads, and like 50-50. You can't have one without the other. So eventually I just made it a point to just like, okay, I'm going to post on Instagram where my audience is 3 times a week. Like, just that's it. I needed to pick something that I could stay consistent with, because every time I tried to do more, I would burn out. And every time I would try to do less, then it's harder to get back on the horse. So eventually it was like, I need to make a plan and stick with it. And to this day, I'm still posting 3 times a week organically, nonstop. And then I spent all of 2020, when we were all inside, learning how to run Facebook and Instagram ads. And that was one hell of a skill set to acquire before taking this and launching it. So I think the combination of organic posting consistently plus learning ads is what really helped my business.
Let's see. Okay. Patricia Rose just said, just followed you on Instagram. Great content.
Sweet.
Uh,
Thank you.
do you have a memorable success story that of a lifter or a coach that overcame pain through your methods?
Yes. So this is a prime example here of, we had somebody prepping for a powerlifting competition, and maybe 6 weeks out, they started getting hip pain during the squat. And right, they're panicking. Like, I'm starting to peak here. How am I going to perform on the platform? And I did the evaluation, and one thing that I noticed is, right before the onset of the hip pain, they widen their stance up, because they're like, I got to go wide right before the competition because I can squat more. Little did this person know that going wider without dropping the intensity, without like making like a slight back off, was enough to basically put their hip in a provocative position, and the hip became irritated from that. So basically we had to make a decision of like, well, what do we do here? Do we move the stance back in and make it pain-free, but then leave some weight on the platform? Or do we grind through pain here with the wider stance, with the potential to squat more, but also the potential to get an injury? And what happened was, we used our principles where basically step one is, let's optimize form and programming. And we settled on, okay, instead of just stopping lifting altogether, we're going to bring the stance in a little bit, right? Just enough to make it tolerable. And then from there, we added in some direct hip flexor loading just to kind of calm down that anterior hip. And then what happened was, gradually, as the fire was put out, he was able to slowly, and I'm talking like inches at a time, gradually get that stance back out to his competition stance, and was able to squat pain-free. And to some of you, that might seem like that's all you did. And the answer is, yeah, I didn't add any kind of crazy rehab gimmicks. It was finding the entry point, which squat form works for this person right now, giving them the tools to calm pain down. That was direct hip flexor loading, making sure we had the programming dialed in, and then gradual re-exposure to their form of choosing. And that's just one story that sticks out. But there's plenty of those stories where it comes to whether it's the shoulder and we need to bench differently for a little bit, or whether it's the knee, where if we're working with a CrossFitter who's really knee dominant and we need to take out front squats and show a CrossFitter how to low bar back squat for a while, right? And to them, that may be foreign, low bar back squat for a CrossFitter, but they're able to squat pain-free, right? And then helping them gradually get back into their front squats and Olympic lifts. So, yeah.
Yeah, the middle ground of the what I would call, you talked about people who talk about form doesn't matter, your body can get used to, or I call it barbell nihilism. Like, you just do whatever you want. It seems that the tissues can adapt to a lot of things if you give them time, but most people are very would that encounter that an injury. I got to be careful how I phrase this. It is common, it seems, for injuries to occur when a change is introduced without adjusting intensity to enable the tissue to adapt to what you're asking it to do now. You know, if you've been low bar squatting with a certain stance for 10 years and then expect yourself to squat the same or more weight with a significant change in your stance or whatever how fast you're accelerating into the bottom, or how far your knees push forward, you're stressing tissue that hasn't seen that load before,
Yeah.
at least in that range of motion potentially. So it's being able to help a coach or sorry a client be a little bit more patient and progressively overload that tissue, which it might be getting exposed to that intensity or that range of motion in a way that it hadn't, even though you've been training for 10 years,
Exactly.
can
And
make
that's
a
like it
huge
comes up
difference.
like the whole variety debate, like how much variety is too much. And that, again, that's the middle
Right.
ground,
Right.
right? You can't go down the whole muscle confusion rabbit hole and never progressively load and just train differently every week because you're trying to build resilience in all positions. Well, you're never at the expense of progressively loading. But then on the flip side, if all you do is squat, bench, deadlift the same way all the time with no accessory work, sure, you're going to get stronger. But then when life unexpectedly does load you in different positions, we might potentially be looking at some sort of injury risk. So there needs to be this happy medium of, I always like to say the concept of like find the client's big three, like what squat, bench, and deadlift variation is going to work best for them in the long haul, and then sprinkling in assistance work as needed based on goals.
Do you have a timeline for? I know this is probably going to sound like a question that you can't really answer because it depends. But I feel like one of the biggest shifts in my mental model of training is the timeline of adaptation for different tissues. So, for example, you can see performance improvement in terms of weight on the bar from neuromuscular or muscle or just muscle adaptation in a relatively short period of time. Connective tissue seems to operate on a much longer timeline. Do you
Yeah.
have any? Is this
No, this is a fair
wacky
question.
theory or?
Yeah, we can use the example of like a tendinopathy. Like when people come in with a cranky tendinopathy, like you're looking like at a 6-12 month thing, right?
Yeah.
And that's like where rehab, the traditional rehab medical model fails people, right? If somebody comes in with a cranky tendon and the therapist doesn't get them better 3 times a week for 4 weeks, and then they say it's failed physical therapy, you didn't even give it the chance to go through its natural healing process.
You can't
right?
just scrape it with a butter knife once a week for 4 weeks.
Hey, that might help with pain, but not because you're changing the tissue at all. There's all kind of other reasons why somebody's pain might decrease after that.
Yeah.
But yeah, tissues take time, and that's same thing if we're dealing with chronic pain. If you're talking like a
Yep.
sensitive nervous system, like where somebody is peripherally or centrally sensitized, chronic pain is just not going to go away in a month, and that's where I think the coach really comes into play, because just based on our medical model, physical therapists aren't going to be seeing people in the clinic under insurance for years and years and years. We're going
Right.
to do the best we can with the red tape that we have, but if I can send somebody to like a strength coach who has some sort of background knowledge about injury and tissue healing and biopsychosocial model, they can help these folks take it the rest of the way. So even if it's a tendon issue, I still like to see that we're heading in the right direction within the first month. But I'm saying up front, like, hey, this is the long haul type thing here.
Yeah, and nonlinear. It's like
Exactly.
yeah, which is tough for people to wrap their head around. Are there any surgeries? I know we talked a little bit about not treating, or at least not jumping to surgery, but are there any surgeries that you still see being useful or maybe not unavoidable, but the best
Yeah.
solution for clients?
Yeah. So once you start to get neurological involvement with like low back pain, that's when back surgery tends to shine. So if somebody just has a really hot herniated disc that is physiologically pushing on a nerve root and is causing excruciating pain, like shooting down their leg, a lot of times surgery is like going to be warranted in those situations. So we still do recommend like microdiscectomies, where you just go in and shave away part of the disc on people that are having these peripheralized symptoms. But for somebody with just regular old back pain, like a sore back, that's where we're trying to move away from like surgery.
How about the slap tear you got? Do you still see?
Yeah. So
people
that
getting
was
those?
something. Another example would be a shoulder, like a shoulder that is truly unstable, one that is dislocating, one that my slap tear was an example. Yeah. Those are going to be situations where you're going to need surgery, right? The last time I checked, this stat was like, if you dislocate a shoulder under the age of 20, there's a 90% chance you're going to dislocate again if you don't have surgery. So we're not here to say that surgery is not necessary. For some conditions, it is going to be the best option. We're just here saying it's overused and it's jumped to way too quickly.
Gotcha. I know we're getting a little bit over time, but I've got a couple I'm really curious about. One is on continuous learning. One thing that's fascinating about your story, and I hear this from a lot of people who emerge with contrarian but correct perspectives, is that you are a continuous learner. And even, you know, your ideas really developed before and solidified and kind of emerged while you're getting the degree that makes you, and you know, I'm making the quote the bunny ears here, like on paper, getting that degree is what you made you qualified to have an opinion about this stuff. But your actual opinions came from what you learned on your own. I'm curious, how do you personally stay up to date, or like what drives you, and what sources do you pull from when you're? I would assume you're just that's who you are as a person. You're constantly refining your mental model. What's your process for that?
Well, a couple of things here. I mean, I wasn't trained on the biopsychosocial model of pain. I went to PT school and I came out thinking that I was going to like put people's hips back in place and derotate their spine by doing specific adjustments. And so I had a wake up call when I first came out of school and I got into this scene and started at the time following people older and smarter than me in the biopsychosocial model. And that's when I was like, whoa, is there something here? And I kind of just went with that. And that's when I started myself back in the early or late 2016, 17, started digging in myself to the research. I was making sure I was following smart people on Instagram back then. And now, since I'm more of the business operator, I basically pay one of our instructors, Dr. Ben Geierman, to do a research roundup. So every month he pulls 2 fresh studies on topics of rehab and strength training and reviews them. And then we send it out to our email list the last Tuesday of every month. We just actually sent it out 2 days ago. And I read those. So it's pretty cool to see how it's come full circle now. I used to be the one in the trenches, like digging through it. And now I'm like, oh my gosh, Ben gets to write these and I get to read 2 new studies every month.
That's
making
amazing.
Sure that like once you step out of clinical care, because I'm no longer in clinical care, you have to make sure. I always wanted to make sure that I was still staying sharp, and that's how I do that now.
That's awesome. So what's next for Barbell Rehab? Where do you see the
I think
company
we've already
going?
kind of found what works, live and online courses. So we just launched our second live course, which is how to coach and modify the Olympic lifts. So now we have the Barbell Rehab weightlifting certification. So we go through clean, jerk, and snatch. What do you do when there's pain in CrossFit? What do you do when there's pain in Olympic lifting, group fitness, functional fitness? So that's pretty cool. So now we have 2 live courses going, one on just the basic lifts, squat, bench, dead, one on the Olympic lifts. And we're in the works of making another live course for sports rehab, right? Return to play, plyo-based, power-based movements. And we're going to just keep building out our online course catalog to cover more niche topics so that we are fully like the go-to resource for coaches and clinicians looking to help clients manage pain and improve performance.
Outstanding. any final advice to our audience of coaches, aspiring fitness professionals, on building a career that blends business with the clinical or technical expertise side?
Yeah, reverse engineer it. Um, if you're stuck in a job that you don't like, don't feel like you need to quit and just take the leap. Build something up on the side first, right? I feel like there's a lot of misguided advice of just like, you're never going to get to where you want to be until you quit that job, which is inevitably going to be the goal. But don't be afraid to dabble first, okay? So that's one thing from the business side of things. That's what I did, right? I was doing things on the side, running barbell rehab on the side, and that's what eventually gave me the courage to wean down to 3 times a week and then quit. Two, imposter syndrome never goes away. It never goes away. You just learn how to wrangle it and manage it a little bit better. I think it's human, and it's. I heard a quote once that said, somebody said, only the real imposters are the ones that don't have imposter syndrome. Okay, so if you're second guessing yourself, it's a totally normal human behavior, right? It just means that you really care and you want to help people. So learn to just dance and kind of rein in imposter syndrome a little bit better. And then from a coaching standpoint, don't be afraid to be more curious when somebody is in pain and going outside of strict forms and working with somebody to find something that feels good for them. The coach, in my opinion, is more of a guide than kind of like a dictator, right? So help guide people to what works best for them.
Love it. Thank you, sir. And where can people find more about you or Barbell Rehab if they want to sign up for one of your courses?
Yeah, so my two main sources are going to be Instagram, Barbell Rehab. That's where we're posting 3 times a week with free content updates, and our website, barbellrehab.com. That's where all of our courses are, and that's where our podcast is, where we kind of do this thing too and bring on other industry leaders to chat all things pain and performance.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us. And for the audience, if you haven't registered or want to sign up for the Business of Coaching workshop, go to turnkey.coach/BOC, turnkey.coach/BOC. We'll have more guests and topics on how to be a more professional barbell coach, grow your business, get more clients, and make more money, and help more people, most importantly. I love that point. Thank you again, Dr. Mash, and looking forward to continuing to follow you and see what you guys put out.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.